To remove the O2 sensors, I recommend lubricating the threads and then simply unplug the electrical connectors, and then you can use a 22mm wrench, use the box end to break it loose. These are the exhaust bracket support bolts. You remove 2 on the right side exhaust, 2 on the left side exhaust, and then 2 in the center connecting to the transmission. And then here I am just placing the nuts back onto the bolts just to keep them organized and out of the floor. And the 2 back into the transmission area. And then removing the bolt to this silver bracket that the O2 sensor connector is mounted to. And then removing the electrical connector to the transmission. And then just above there, there is one nut, or excuse me, screw holding the bracket in place. And then you can swing the ABC line out. And before you move this transmission fluid line, you'll want to remove the mounting bracket there and right there. Same for the other side. Follow that line over, and that'll be that one and that one. You can put the screws back in, that way you don't lose them. Keeps it more organized. And this is the clip for the transmission shift linkage connector. Use a very small flat blade screwdriver to try and pry it up and out. Make sure your transmission selector is in neutral or drive. It will not come out if it is still in park. Next, you can remove these black plastic access covers so that you can use a screwdriver to pry the flywheel to the correct orientation so you can access the, I believe it's 10 or 13mm bolts on the inside. And you only want to turn the engine in the clockwise direction if you're looking at it from the front of the bumper towards the engine. From the way I'm facing, from the rear of the engine towards the front, then you want to turn it counterclockwise. And you want to counter hold with a flat blade screwdriver while you break loose the flywheel bolts that hold towards the torque converter. And before removing your transmission cooler lines, you want to clean the area, make sure there's no dirt or debris or grease, so that when you break this loose, nothing falls inside. Some oil might run out, so be prepared for that and have some towels ready. And also a set of stop plugs so that you can put them into the holes to prevent oil from leaking out and also to prevent contaminants from entering. Here you see I'm installing a blue stop plug in there that helps stop the oil drain, and then I'm just wrapping a towel around it. And same for the other side. Clean the area good and break it free. It is not necessary to drain the transmission fluid. The procedure might say to drain the transmission fluid, but it is not necessary. Only a very minor amount will leak out, and then you can simply add in a few ounces to compensate. Also install stop plugs into the holes into the transmission, not just the oil cooler lines, but all the holes. And there you see the stop plug being installed in the transmission cooler. So here I'm able to reach some of the top bell housing bolts by running a long extension all the way over here, and then using my wrench to break it loose. Upper four transmission bell housing bolts are actually much easier to reach from the top of the engine bay. Simply remove your air intake ducting, and you can use a very long reach handled ratchet to access those bolts. It's kind of a pain to reach it with these very long extensions, but it can be done. So first I'll break it free with my ratchet, and then I'll drive it the rest of the way out with the electric ratchet. I'm only removing the top set of the bolts. I'm not removing all the bolts just yet. We need to have the transmission jack in place before removing all the bell housing bolts. I'm going back to the transmission cooler or transmission oil fill tube. Remove the one bolt at the top, and then I just moved the bracket out of the way and pulled the bottom side of that bolt. It's a E-Torx bolt, but an 8 or is it a 9mm worked fairly well to loosen it up enough, and then push it up and out of the way. And you go back to the top and pull that fill tube the rest of the way out. You can see that O-ring there was flattened, so I recommend getting a spare. Otherwise you might have a leak to that area. Once you have a transmission jack in place and supporting the transmission, you can start removing the rear transmission mount and transmission mount cross-membered bar. And then you have to make sure your transmission is in neutral and your parking brake is off, so you can turn the drive shaft, and you want to loosen up these Torx bolts and nuts in the back, and then spin it around until you get to the next area. I recommend removing all the bolts That way you can take the flex disc all the way out and gives you a little bit more room to maneuver the transmission when you're lowering it out and separating it from the engine. First to break it free with the breaker bar, and then I come in with the ratchet to finish it the rest of the way out. This bolt here was damaged on the inside, so I had to beat the socket into place. You want to make absolutely sure that your socket is seated all the way in, otherwise you'll round out your bolt, and these bolts are extremely tight and you're going to have a lot of trouble getting it off of there if you round it out. So make absolutely sure your socket is seated all the way in. And then once you remove all the bolts, you can use a pry bar to separate the flex disc. Sometimes those sockets in there will stick to one side or the other, and this flex disc was severely worn and torn, so we'll be replacing it. Now that I have the rear mount removed, I can finish removing all the bell housing bolts. And then you can slide the transmission backwards, and maneuvering around the drive shaft and also the gear selector connecting rod. Make sure those two don't get in the way. So you want to take it nice and slow here, look around and check the front, check the back, little movements at a time. Make sure you're not pulling on any of these lines. And nice and slow, move it down and out. With this Harbor Freight transmission jack, you do not want to use a power tool, you just want to use a hand ratchet. Once the transmission was low enough, I installed the securing strap. And then I'm installing these zip ties around the bell housing and towards the front of the torque converter. This is to prevent the torque converter from slipping out. These torque converters are not bolted in, they can simply slide in and out. So you want to make absolutely sure that you secure it in place so that it does not fall out. And then I realized once I got the transmission jack all the way down that I didn't have enough clearance to move the transmission out, so I had to move it down onto the floor. And then my battery died just as soon as I was finishing it off. But you want to have another set of blocks in the rear end.